There are probably people out there who describe a lot of work output as slop long before AI came along, but Workslop is now being attributed to employees using AI ineffectively, draining the productivity of other employees who have to work with those outputs. In the September longform episode of For Immediate Release, we'll explore this idea of Workslop and what can be done about it. Also in this episode, we'll discuss Chris Hewer's effort to establish a manifesto for the human-centered organization. We'll connect the dots between 3 studies that explore how the role of the internal communicator is evolving. Researchers at Amazon have proposed a framework for identifying just the right people to receive a given message, which, let's face it, has long been the holy grail of internal communication. We'll revisit the press release and why it might have a bigger role in getting your brand into AI overviews and search results than has been previously suggested. And how are people using AI? Well, that depends on what they're using it for and the tools that they're using. All that and Dan York's Tech Report are coming your way right now on For Immediate Release. Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode number 482 of For Immediate Release. This is our long-form episode for September 2025. I'm Shel Holtz in Concord, California.
And hi, everyone. I'm Neville Hobson in the UK.
And as I mentioned, this is our long-form episode. That means we will be reporting on 6 topics of interest to communicators. Interestingly, I think all of them are connected either directly or indirectly to artificial intelligence. I also have Dan York here with an interesting report. You and I both have a few things to say about one of the topics that Dan is reporting on. As always, though, with our monthly episode, we do have some housekeeping to get through before we jump into our topics of the month. Neville, you're going to catch us up on the items that we have reported on since the last episode, and we have some comments in some of these reports, and that is an opportunity for me to remind everybody that we love your comments. Please participate in this podcast by sharing those comments. It doesn't have to be about something we reported on. By the way, you can introduce a topic. This used to happen all the time in the early days of the show. Somebody would say, "Why don't you guys talk about this?" And we would, and it just became the content of the show. So please leave a comment on the show notes, leave them on LinkedIn, which is where most of our comments come from these days. People leaving a thought, some feedback on our announcement of the availability of a new episode. Also do that on Facebook in multiple places. And you could always just go over to the website and record a comment. There's a little button that says leave voicemail, and you can record a 90-second comment. You could do that with your own computer and send us an MP3 file to fircomments@gmail.com. Lots of ways to participate in this show, and we really hope you will. So we'll share some of the comments that we have received in the last month. Neville, as you remind us what we talked about.
Indeed. So it was kind of an odd month, September, because you were on holiday for 2 weeks and we didn't do any live recording during that time, but we had a couple of...
It was my 50th wedding anniversary. So yeah, Michelle and I were off.
You were cruising the Mediterranean and having a good time. But we had a couple of little recordings tucked in our back pocket that we could publish in the interim. So we did that. But let's share with you what we did do since the last monthly episode for August. That was on the 25th of August, episode number 4. So lead story, we explored, because this is like this one, there were 6 topics on that episode in the long form edition. But the lead story, we explored when corporate silence backfires and how communicators can help leaders make better choices. A good discussion we had on that. We also discussed AI, PR, deepfakes, and a whole lot more, including Dan York's reports. Again, there's a 90-minute show, like this one's likely to be as well. 29 on the 1st of September, Hacking AI Optimization versus Doing the Hard Work was the title of that one. Amid the rise of GEO, we discussed how brands are seeking workarounds to appear in AI-generated answers. But shortcuts don't build trust. We said old school PR and marketing still matter. And you got a comment, right, Shel?
We did, from Frank Diaz, who's become one of our loyal listeners. He said, "This was my conclusion as well. Once I filtered everything, you and your followers may find my hard graft, what's that? Checklist of actually dialing up best practice useful. His post titled, How to Master AI Citation Strategy for SEO was on LinkedIn, and we'll include a link to that in the show notes to provide context for that comment.
Cool. On the 9th September, we published episode 480, Reflections on AI Ethics and the Role of Communicators. And this was published on that day. You'd already gone on holiday. And this was a conversation between Sylvia Cambier, who was a guest co-host back in July when we interviewed Paul Tye from the Vatican about artificial intelligence. We picked up on where that interview left off with some reflections on AI, dignity, what really matters, what caught our individual attention and made us think a lot about the topic and that interview. And one thing I found interesting is that, and this is, I guess, the nature of how people like listening, what they like listening to, is that episode got more attention in terms of listens and downloads than the actual interview, because we talked about the interview in that episode. Because that was the end of July. We've had August and people have been on holiday and they're catching up, and I guess they listened to that. But that was a really good chat Sylvia and I had. Episode 481 on the 24th of September. So you get the time gap there. There's 2 weeks gap almost between that. The M-panic, very topical issue. AI writing and misguided assumptions. Can tone and authenticity survive AI polish, we asked. And we then dove into the M-kerfuffle that has communicators divided during much of this year. And we also touched on, you explained this pretty well, how you turned 28 blog posts into a forthcoming book with AI's help. There you have a classic example of AI-assisted writing in work, in action. We had comments too for this, didn't we?
We did. Daniel Pauling wrote that the M- doesn't solely come from training data. That was a point that I made in our discussion, is that the reason you see so many M- is because the training sets include all of this content that has M-. But Daniel says it also comes from how generative AI is programmed to be more friendly and what it associates with friendliness. And he referred to a post where he went into some detail on that. I'll include a link to that in the show notes too. John Cass had a rather thoughtful comment. He said, it's not easy to admit that we struggle with writing. My perspective shifted while researching 17th century history. Back then, there was no standardized dictionary and writing wasn't rigid. People were praised for spelling words in ways that still made sense, even if they varied. Shakespeare spelled his own name multiple ways. Looking back reminds us what written language really is, a visual representation of speech. It's speech that carries meaning, not the perfection of spelling or grammar. We'd find it odd to interrupt someone mid-conversation to correct their phrasing, yet we do that constantly with the written word. This matters especially in PR and communications. We need to speak the language of our audience, not the textbook. The most successful campaigns worked precisely because they used conversational language. I think part of the anxiety around AI and its impact on writing comes from our best writers. They worry about how it might shape or dilute their thinking. But human creativity is collective. Even our most original ideas are built on the foundations of what came before. If anything, the question becomes, will AI stop the progress of speech, tie it to a millstone, or will it help language adapt and change? I noted just very briefly that Chris Penn had recently written a post that suggested that AI is not going to hurt creativity because creative people are always going to be creative. In fact, I was thinking this when we were on the cruise because we went to an art auction. I don't know if you knew, there's always art auctions on the big cruise ships.
Of course. Yeah.
There's a art studio out of New York. They do the whole cruise ship business. And we're looking at all of these paintings by young, new artists that people are spending thousands and thousands of dollars bidding on in this auction. What are you doing painting? You can just have AI create it. My point was the creative people are going to be creative and they're going to create. This is what Chris Penn said. And John replied, that's true, though I'm reminded of several high-level creatives where folks thought the use of AI was disrupting their thinking. To me, that only might mean for a few people, and not everyone thinks in the same way, hence culture and politics.
That's a good essay comment from John, I think. I like that very much. Thanks very much for that, John. And in between all of that, we had a new interview that we recorded just before you went away on holiday. This was with Stephanie Grober from I've forgotten the name of her agency, Shel. Do you remember it?
Not off the top of my
In New
head,
York?
sorry.
Okay. You'll find a link to it in one of the links we'll have in the show notes, who is quite an authority on generalized, what does GEO stand for again?
Generative Engine Optimization.
That's it. Generative Engine Optimization. And one of those delightful phrases that we hit ourselves with all the time.
By the way,
so get used to it, though. You're going to hear a lot about GEO, so get used to it.
I did hear somebody suggest that we should just call it SEO, but change the E in that to everything, so it's or everywhere. So it's search everywhere optimization. I kind of liked that.
Yeah, that might work.
Yeah.
So I guess the kind of anchor for the conversation with Stephanie was: is GEO the next SEO? Or a passing fad, or just good comms practice in disguise? We talked about that, what GEO means for communicators today and what to do about it. It was a good 40-minute discussion. And so that was published on the 16th of September. So we had 5 podcast episodes to choose from since the August one. So that's not too bad record, given that you were away for half of the month.
Not bad at all. We are a content machine. And that machine continues with Circle of Fellows. This is the monthly panel discussion among a group of fellows of the International Association of Business Communicators. I was at sea for this one, too. Brad Whitworth was the moderator, talking about what it means for communicators that hybrid appears to be winning as the preferred workplace configuration. Priya Bates, Ritzi Ronquillo, and Angela Sinicus participated in that conversation. It's up on the FIR Podcast Network. The one that is coming up in October sounds great. Episode number 121. I'll be moderating this one. It will start at noon Eastern Time on Thursday, October 23rd, and it's about evolving roles and strategic goals. And here's the description that Anna Willie gave me for this, since it was waiting for me when I came back. Communication professionals are continuously adapting alongside new tools and channels. This requires a deep understanding of audiences and the ever-changing digital environment. Strategic communication goals must align with the organization's objectives as they impact brand reputation, enhancing internal communications and addressing ongoing change. So we have 3 panelists lined up so far: Laurie Dawkins, Amanda Hamilton-Atwell, and Mike Klein, and a 4th player to be named later. So
sounds good.
Yeah. That'll be coming up in October. You can join those live and participate in the conversation or catch the podcast.
Our first topic for September. During this year on this podcast, we've returned again and again to one central theme, actually more than one, but this particular one. AI must be about people, not just machines. Whether we were talking about the future of work, the role of managers in an AI-enabled world, or the Vatican's perspective on AI ethics with the wisdom of the heart. In our July interview with Monsignor Paul Tai, the question has always been the same. How do we ensure that technology serves humanity rather than just the other way around? That's the context for Chris Hewer's latest work. Chris is an internet pioneer and serial entrepreneur. Many of you will perhaps know Chris from the Social Media Club nonprofit he founded in the early days of social media. It reached 350 cities globally, so quite a big spread. Building on an online brainstorm Chris led on the 17th of September, when more than 50 people connected from around the world to discuss defining human-centered organizations, which I joined and wrote about on LinkedIn afterwards, Chris has published a follow-up titled The Birth of the H Corp, the letter H, where H, I believe, stands for humanity. Could be human or humanness, but I think it's humanity. It's a bold attempt to define what organizations owe humanity in the age of AI. The central concern he raises is that efficiency has become the dominant corporate narrative. He cites the example of Shopify's CEO, who said managers must prove why AI can't do the job before hiring another human. We referenced that in an FIR episode in the summer, if I recall correctly. That kind of AI-first thinking risks eroding human dignity in the workplace. Chris argues that we need an alternative. The H Corp framework is a starting point. Organizations must enable humans rather than replace them, reinvest AI gains back into people, and make empathy and ethics structural rather than optional. What I find powerful in this is the recognition of tensions. For example, how AI can hollow out junior-level roles and undermine leadership pipelines, Participants in the brainstorm also flagged cultural sovereignty, the idea that AI shouldn't just reflect Silicon Valley's worldview, but the diversity of human society. Chris's goal is to draft an H Corp manifesto later this year, and I think he's planning to launch it in November. He likens this to the naming moment of social media, a concept that crystallizes shared ambitions and sparks a broader movement. It won't be perfect, certainly not complete, but it could serve as a North Star for organizations that want to put human flourishing at the center of AI adoption. For us as communicators, this is an important conversation. How do we frame the narrative inside organizations so that AI isn't just about productivity and cost cutting, but about augmenting human potential? That very question we have addressed in an episode. In fact, it might have been more than one episode in the past few months. And how do we give shape to something like H Corp so it doesn't just remain an ideal, but becomes a practical reality? What strikes me about the H Corp idea is that it's not about resisting AI or slowing technological progress. It's about making deliberate choices so that organizations put people at the center of change. That ties directly back to many of the conversations we've had on FIR over the past year, as I mentioned earlier. The question is whether communicators, leaders, and organizations will seize the opportunity to shape AI for human flourishing or let the technology shape us by default. Could H Corp become a rallying concept in the way ESG or CSR did, or will it risk getting diluted into corporate sloganeering? What role should communicators play to keep it real and practical? I bet you've got some ideas about that.
Oh, of course I do. Otherwise, why would we be here talking to each other?
Yeah.
First of all, I think that AI is less responsible for this situation than the general nature of business is, especially in a capitalist society. And I'm not going to get into a philosophical debate about capitalism. I am a capitalist myself, a very proud one. I like money. I like making money. I'd like to make more money. But if the goal of an organization, based on its fiduciary responsibility, especially a public corporation, is to earn a return for their investors, then when AI comes along, it makes complete sense to me that the way the organization's leaders are going to approach it is, how does this help us fulfill that obligation of providing the greatest possible return, maximizing the investment of the owners of the organizations? Yeah, finding ways to reduce costs and reduce staff and have a machine do work 24/7 instead. I can see exactly where that comes from. Doesn't mean I think that's what organizations should be doing, but it makes sense to me that that's what they are doing and that would be the first thing they would do. Now, you couple that with the fact that, what's the first thing we do with any new technology is stuff that we were doing with old technology that the new technology does better. I've been making this point for decades and decades. The very first thing we did with a computer was what we were already doing with a typewriter. We were word processing. It's what we were already doing with ledgers. We used spreadsheets. The uses of the technology that nobody had thought of came later, after we got accustomed to using them to do the stuff that we had already been doing before. So I think that, AI has not been around long enough, generative AI in particular, the type of AI that has everybody talking these days. And I think we're on that same trajectory. We have to get through this, using it to do what we've already been doing before we can start to go, oh, what else we could do with this? And find ways to be more humanistic in the organization with these tools. And I think for some organizations that will come. I think for some organizations, they're going to say, we just need to use this to make as much money as possible while spending as little money as possible. I think those are considerations here when you're talking about how organizations are going to use this. The other issue, though, is that I think most organizations are not tackling AI in its early days in a strategic way. There's ample data out there to reinforce this, that people are not looking at this holistically. How is this going to change our organization? Just having a conversation in my company the other day with one of our executive leaders, and made me very happy to be having this conversation, because we were talking about the entry-level job in the construction industry, which is a project engineer, and how a lot of what a project engineer does is likely to get automated. There are these things, and I'm not going to get into what they are, but in construction, they're called submittals, and they take a fair amount of time, and you have to have some background in how to create one, and AI can probably do that in a matter of minutes, given the right inputs. Does that mean that there are going to be fewer project engineers? No, our conversation was about how do we redefine the role of the project engineer so that they're still learning the stuff they need to in order to start moving up into project manager, project director, superintendent, whatever the role is that they're interested in pursuing. You still need to have an entry-level position that gives you the foundation for that. It's not going to be the same job. I think the same is true in communications. The entry-level communicator, the entry-level public relations agency employee is not going to be doing the same job in 5 years that they were doing 5 years ago. Does that mean that job goes away, or does it mean that we rethink what that job is? And I think the smart organizations are going to rethink what it is. And that, I think, is an approach to being humanistic, because we're not dispensing with the role. We're rethinking what that role is.
Yeah, it's a big topic, Shel. You said some things there that I would challenge you on, to be frank. But this is at the core of what we discussed with Paul Tye back in July. So to me, I see it as, I don't disagree with you at all about some companies are going to shut their ears and eyes to anything other than we use this to make money. We use this for speed, efficiency, so we beat our competitors and we make money. And that means some people are going to lose their jobs, and we're going to automate this and restructure things, or not, as the case might be. Where I think the conversation needs to be, which is at the heart of what Chris is talking about, is helping organizations see this other element of this. Beyond that, it's the people. That description I gave, and it's obviously biased the way I did it because it leads into my argument here, that it devalues human work, devalues the people in an organization. So how do we, and this is the question for communicators, how do we help reset the narrative, if you like, towards augmenting people rather than replacing them? Because however you dress it up, even those who say, no, it doesn't mean we're going to say we're going to replace people. Yes, it does, the way your language is. So the language is also part of the problem. So one of the arguments, and this came out in the brainstorm on the 17th of September, is that talk about human-centered often defaults to only privileged voices and excludes marginalized groups. And one argument that I believe is genuine is the idea that AI, there's only one version of AI and in one language, in English, only one version of AI, and that is the version as seen in Silicon Valley, or more widely in the global north, capital G, capital N. What about the global south, capital G, capital S? That's below the equator. And there's interesting things going on there with AI, where some countries, companies in some countries have introduced chatbots in Spanish, for instance, in Latin America, full of relevance to people in those countries. So ChatGPT's definitely not the relevant tool for them. So those are kind of conversations that I think we should stimulate in organizations to say, it's kind of yes, but hold on a second. You need to think about this as well. And therein will be, I think, a lot of discord in some organizations where you'll find, for instance, some will say, I'm not ignoring the people. And it's not about that at all. Efficiency, we can all work together and be happy and all that stuff. That's not really what's likely to happen with that approach. So this idea, I think, is worthy of promoting, if you like, that we need to not devalue the people in an organization. We need to have them first in our minds. So yes, we're going to make tons of money. Hang on a minute. How do we help our people be able to help us make a lot of money? And is that the goal everyone will agree with? So I understand 100%, and at the risk of sounding condescending, I'm not meaning to be, believe me, that I'm like you. Capitalism is, generally speaking, a good thing. There are major uglinesses about it, I have to admit. But the notion of making money and profit and investing that to make more money and provide more things for your family and all that stuff, 100% has my support. Yet there are elements of that are not good, because we have evidence all over the place. People suffer when change happens in organizations. The people are the ones that are not last in the queue of thinking when change happens in organizations, particularly when it means deploying technology. So this is not about, as well, some will say that the kind of wokiness of it all. I'm fed up with these political labels, I must admit, but they're used a lot and people seem to understand a sense of it. Let's bring some of that empathy, if you like, into organizations. And that's a word I know that, again, has been politicized
That's
in
a
the
trigger word right
weaponization
now, isn't it?
of thinking. You bet it is. In America, particularly. So nevertheless, this is our landscape. We have these changes confronting us. We have this technology that everyone calls AI that is literally at a light speed pace is surrounding us and evolving and changing day by day. You've been reading this, I know you have, because I certainly have, about ChatGPT Pulse. The idea of a custom, message to your mobile device overnight. I would love something like that. I have to tell you, if it was customized the way I would like it and delivered the way I like it on my mobile device, you've sold me on that idea. So yet I could think of 10 people I know who absolutely hate the idea of that. It's intrusive in their view, even though I say, yeah, but you can control it. You switch it on, switch it off. Don't do it. And this is a paid option too. So that's going on. There's other things going on that we're paying attention to as well with other chatbots and other technologies in this big space. But this needs attention more than it's getting, in my view. And I think potentially what Chris Hewer is offering could become a rallying concept. And I think of the 50 people who are in that call, all of whom have some great ideas, that's not really enough to get this thing moving. But again, Chris is not looking for, and none of the people on that call, I believe, are either, like an instant revolution or resolution to an idea that's suddenly going to capture imaginations everywhere. This is going to be hard work. And I don't think it's practical to think, and I don't think anyone's even proposing this, in fact, that this is like, okay, we want everyone to be looking at this now and do it. No matter what, you've got to pay attention to this. That's not going to work. You made the point, and I agree with you. This isn't going to appeal to some, and some are actively going to resist it. And even some employees who might have consequential losses as a result of it are going to resist it too, because it's new. It requires a big change in how you work and how you live even. But could it be a rallying concept? The idea of this will capture imaginations, particularly if we have influential voices such as the Vatican, the Catholic Church talking about this. We have others elsewhere around the world who are talking about this. Maybe it will gather steam. But I'm wondering, could this be a rallying concept, this idea?
It could be. My skepticism, and again, I throw all my support to Chris Hewer, and if he is able to get this off the ground, I'll be really impressed and pleased.
Buy him a beer.
But yeah, definitely. But I think the biggest effort that has to be undertaken to make this work is the incentive to the leaders of the businesses who, again, are obliged to produce the maximum return for their investors. How do you connect those dots? You're talking about a change in the way they do business, and the only way you get people to support change is if they find something in that change that is aligned with their interests and their goals and something that makes them want to.
Right. So in which case, the H Corp manifesto, which is a draft that will come out in November, is then the template to address those kinds of questions. How do we include in this manifesto ...
Right. That's what I want to see, because mostly manifestos talk about what's wrong. And not so much about how to fix it.
No, I don't see that. I think from what I saw on the 17th of September when I took part in this call with all these people there, notwithstanding some of the tech challenges we have with the platform to share comments and so forth, that there's a groundswell of willingness to do this. Now, is that sustainable? I don't know. I think Chris has got a great idea, leading the charge on this with the input of all these people who are willing to get involved that will then contribute to this manifesto. So we're going to see the initial platform, if you will, the foundational platform of what Chris is setting out. How do we build on that? And therein comes the challenge for everyone who's involved in that. It's a small group. That's a fact. Yeah. So getting the word out might persuade others to get involved in this, perhaps in some way. But I think, you've got to start somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And I think this could be a rallying concept.
I will make a prediction that in November, this will be the theme of one of the episodes of FIR.
Maybe we what about it?
Yeah, it could be Chris.
It could be Chris. Yeah, it could be Chris. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge without question. But I would encourage FIR listeners, if it struck a chord with you or sparked an interest, go to the to the Humanizing AI Substack website, link in the show notes. Read Chris's post about introducing the H Corp manifesto and look at some of the stuff available there to download as well and see if you want to get involved in this, because it's open. It's not just the 50 who are there. It's open to anyone who thinks, hey, I've got something I can contribute to this. I've got an idea that I don't know whether it's valid or not. Let me throw it out this group and see what happens. So that is awaiting you after you've listened to this episode.
Well, one of the threads running through so much of our coverage these days is how digital technology is reshaping the way organizations communicate, like minute by minute. There were 3 new reports over the last couple of weeks, and each one of them was fascinating on its own, but taken together, they create a big picture that communicators really need to grapple with. So let's look at these reports. The first is a major new study of enterprise social media. These are the internal platforms, Slack, Teams, things like that, designed for employees inside companies. Researchers studied 99 organizations that adopted Microsoft's Viva Engage. This is the platform that grew out of what used to be Yammer. And what they found was really remarkable. Enterprise social media made company communication networks denser, more communicated, and more democratic. Employees didn't just keep talking to the same people, they formed new ties, and especially they formed weak ties. Weak ties are those casual connections across teams that spark new ideas. I saw a study, and I think we talked about this on the show, good God, maybe 15, 18 years ago, that most people who get a new job were introduced to that job, connected to that job through a weak tie connection, not a strong tie connection. Leaders and employees were more likely to connect directly through internal social networks, and influence wasn't concentrated at the top. It was distributed more evenly across the organization. So tremendous value in having these internal social networks. And, the thing about the Viva Engage versus Slack and Teams is that the channels on, I'll use Teams because it's what we use where I work, they tend to really isolate a team of people within that channel, and there's not a lot of cross communication with other channels, whereas Viva Engage is more open for conversation around broader themes. This is the kind of change internal communicators have dreamed of, breaking down silos, creating broader visibility, fostering innovation in an era when hybrid and remote work can leave people feeling isolated. Enterprise social media offers a way to keep organizations connected in some really powerful ways. The second report comes from Boston Consulting Group. It was highlighted in a compendium of articles in Axios, adds another dimension. BCG estimates that more than 80% of corporate affairs work, and that includes communication, could be augmented or even automated by artificial intelligence. And it's not just about speeding up routine tasks. The report says the biggest gains will come when organizations actually redesign processes around AI, not just bolted onto existing workflows. Goes back to what we were talking about before. For communicators, that means we need to be proactive in thinking about how AI can help us, not just in writing emails faster, but reimagining what communication workflows should look like when AI is part of the mix. And that brings us to the third report from Vox EU, which points to a serious risk. As AI makes it easier and cheaper to produce plausible sounding misinformation, the value of trusted, credible information goes up. That's true in society at large, but it's also true inside organizations. Employees are already swimming in information. If they can't tell what's credible and what's not inside the organization, whether it's about competitors or market conditions or even their own company, their ability to make good decisions will be compromised. And if misinformation creeps into internal channels, it can spread quickly through the same enterprise social media platforms that are supposedly making us better connected. So what happens when you put all 3 of these reports together? On the one hand, enterprise social media can make internal networks more open, connected, and innovative. On the other hand, those networks are vulnerable to being polluted if we don't ensure that the information flowing through them is accurate and trustworthy. And hovering over all of this is the BCG report's reminder that AI is poised to disrupt a huge portion of what communicators do, whether we like it or not. That creates both a challenge and an opportunity for communicators. The challenge is obvious. If we don't take responsibility for credibility and quality, then AI will amplify the problems of misinformation and mistrust. But the opportunity is just as clear. We can use AI thoughtfully to improve how we connect people, streamline processes, and personalize communication while leaning into our role as stewards of trusted information. To me, here's the message. Connection without credibility is fragile, and credibility without connection is limited. Our job is to deliver both by embracing the tools that make networks stronger while also making sure that the information flowing through them is reliable, useful, and true.
Big challenge ahead, Shel, I would say, with all of that. But it is most interesting. In particular, what struck me was the final report you're talking about that was about AI misinformation and trusted news. That surely must be one of the most important areas communicators need to be involved in, is in a sense providing some validity to how people perceive the trustworthiness of what the organization makes available to them internally. That's tricky. And in fact, glancing through that Vox EU report you cited with the research that they've done, it's something they talk about I found quite interesting, where they found that once misinformation, I suppose is the label to give it, was identified, people didn't disengage. They actually consumed more, according to the survey results on this experiment that Vox, together with the Süddeutsche Zeitung newspaper, did, with kind of live audience, as it were. The number of visits increased after the intervention when they realized it was fake. Treated individuals were more likely to maintain their subscription months later compared to those in the control group. And it goes into a lot of detail about how all that came about. The point, though, I think, is that the work involved in doing this provides some kind of insight. As the report says, when the threat of misinformation becomes salient, the value of credible news increases. Now that I've seen that sort of conclusion in a number of reports, notably Edelman's Trust Barometer, not those exact words, but the value of credible news you perceive as credible then becomes more valuable to you when you know that the other stuff over there is not true or it's fake, whatever it might be. So how do you put in place something like that in an organization? I guess that's the big question.
Well, it's interesting. I remember my very first job in corporate communications. This is when I left the world of journalism and joined Dave Orman's team over at Arco. And we had bylines. We had a weekly employee newspaper, and you had bylines. So people knew who wrote the articles. And I said, okay, yeah, I get the idea of a byline in a newspaper. And Ken Estes, who was the editor, said, well, it's no different here. We have bylines so that 1,000 employees will know who to call if they have a story they think is worth sharing. Now, I think having a byline is establishing the names of credible sources of information in the organization that employees can trust. So as they see all this stuff flooding these networks, this came from this person and they always share credible information. So I'm going to pay attention to this. I'm going to listen to this. I think the same is going to be true with external communication. With content marketing, is going to be important to assign a name, a person to this content so that you can start to look at that person as somebody whose outputs are worth paying attention to because they're credible to you. We're going to have to build credibility with our reporters and our thought leaders and our subject matter experts, both internally and externally, so that they become beacons of credibility in this morass of misinformation that we're surely facing.
Yeah. In fact, the Vox EU report, which is focused on implications for the media industry, i.e. for news outlets, for instance, in particular, says that very clearly. If outlets can establish and maintain trust with their readers, translate that into what you just said, the rise of synthetic content becomes not just a threat, but also an opportunity. As trust grows scarcer, as value rises, and audiences may be more willing to pay for reliable, trustworthy journalism. Now, how would you translate that into an organizational setting where employees aren't paying for the employee newsletter? So is it not willing to pay for reliable, trustworthy journalism? It's more about willing to give their attention to reliable, trustworthy, or writing. Let's call it writing, not journalism, because there might be, all sorts of people contributing to that employee newsletter, but the name is identified, and that surely is the commonest of senses you can imagine, that someone, you trust that person because they have a track record, a history in your perception of being worthy of your trust. So you'll pay attention to them. I mean, isn't it as simple as that?
I think it is as simple as that. And for the internal communications function writ large, I don't think it's any different. In any organization, there are people who just don't care what's going on in the company. They want to come in, they want to do their job, they want to go home. And what we're doing in terms of expanding markets or research on new products, okay, whatever. I come in here and I turn these dials all day, and that's all I care about. They find themselves overwhelmed with contradictory information, all of which seems plausible because AI is making it seem plausible. Then suddenly internal communications in the organization becomes the trusted voice. And I think you have the opportunity to get people who didn't used to pay much attention to it to say, okay, look, I got to know what the truth is. And I have come to understand that I am going to get the truth from this channel and from these people. And therefore, I will pay attention to this. Of course, we have to produce the kind of content that produces that kind of a response. But if we can, I think we stand to serve the organization extremely well.
Yeah, I would agree. And in fact, I'm just going to quote a really relevant piece in the conclusion in this Fox EU report. The threshold for trustworthiness rises with the volume and sophistication of misinformation, meaning that media outlets cannot stand still, but must continually invest in helping readers distinguish fact from fabrication, keeping pace with the rapid evolution of AI.
Yeah.
That fits, does it not?
It absolutely does. And when you combine that with the other two reports, one, enterprise social networks become a channel for conveying all of this information. Don't just publish it on the internet and hope somebody's going to pull it. Start a conversation about it in these networks and pull in those different voices. But the fact that it was communications that introduced the topic lends it the credibility to kick off that conversation. So you have that report, and then you have Boston Consulting Group saying, well, if 80% of what communicators do is going to be automated, here's your opportunity to redefine what you're doing so that your time is of value to the organization, even though you're not doing 80% of what you used to do. The world has changed. Things have moved on. There's new work to be done.
Okay, lots to pay attention to there, I think. Okay, so one of the newest buzzwords around generative AI in the workplace is Workslop. No, not workshop, Workslop.
I used to work next to a guy who was a Workslop. Slop, not slop. Never mind. I'm sorry.
Right. Okay. This is a term coined by the Harvard Business Review for content that looks polished, but is actually shallow or misleading, created with AI and then dumped on colleagues to sort out. FIR recently published a report arguing that Workslop is a major reason why companies aren't seeing much ROI from their AI investments. They cite survey data suggesting 40% of employees are dealing with it at a cost of millions in lost productivity. But there's a wrinkle. A sharp critique in Pivot to AI, a blog, points out that this wasn't really a study at all. They say the data comes from an open, unfiltered survey run by BetterUp, a company that just happens to sell AI coaching solutions. The critique calls the HBR article an unlabeled advertising feature, suggesting it shifts blame onto workers while quietly pitching enterprise AI tools. So we're left with two threads. On the one hand, Workslop is a brilliant term for a genuine workplace problem. On the other, the way it's being presented in high-profile outlets might itself be a form of Workslop. That sets up an interesting conversation. How do we separate the real challenges of AI misuse at work from the marketing spin that increasingly surrounds the debate? I should mention, by the way, that I included Pivot to AI's points as a sense of balance, because I found what they were alleging was actually quite significant. I've not seen anyone else talking about this, by the way. I don't want to give you, dear listeners, the impression that the Harvard Business Review has not done a good job here. I think they have. This is a point of view, and it's worth mentioning it as a balancing point to the overall topic. So it raises a number of specific questions, in my view, such as, here's the first one. Is Workslop a real productivity killer or just a catchy buzzword? How much of the problem is genuinely about AI misuse, and how much is just another version of sloppy work that's always existed? Number two question, what responsibility lies with leadership versus employees? Are workers to blame for producing Workslop, or are leaders at fault for mandating AI use without clear purpose or guardrails? And the third question, how should we treat research that blurs into marketing? When a report like HBR's turns out to be tied to a vendor's agenda, as Pivot to AI alleges, how do we separate genuine insight from promotional spin, especially when the underlying problem is real. Now, there are at least 10 other questions to go with all this, Shel, but 3's a good point to start with, I think. What do you think about this? Is this a real issue, or is it just more of the same?
Oh, I think it's a real issue. I don't know if it's as dire an issue as it's being painted. By the way, the first time I saw the word Workslop, it was referenced by Ethan Mollick in a post on LinkedIn. He is the Wharton professor who has become one of the leading voices talking about AI in business. And he echoed the point that Pivot to AI made. He argues that the term itself can shift the blame onto employees who are told to be more productive with AI without leaders doing the hard work of rethinking processes or defining what good AI use actually looks like. The danger, he says, is that Workslop becomes a convenient excuse. If the output is poor, well, it's AI's fault, but that's not leadership. For communicators, it means that we do have to advocate for responsible AI use from the top down, not just coach employees on how to cope with this mess. But, I'm going to go back to a point that I made in one of our earlier discussions today. And that is that this is a new technology and what happens with new technologies. You and I are both old enough to remember when desktop publishing was new. The first tool I used was called Ventura Publisher. I don't know if anybody remembers
that was my
Ventura
first one too.
Publisher.
Yep.
And then, of course, PageMaker. And what happened in organizations when desktop publishing took hold was that every department was cranking out a newsletter and sending them to all employees. Why? Because they could. And I remember the conversations, not just in the organizations where I was consulting, but also IEBC having these conversations with audiences about what to do in your organization. That is, this is not effective communication. We need to get our arms around this. And a lot of companies said, okay, you can't just create a newsletter because you wanna. We're going to have to come up with some guidelines, because right now what we're creating is serious information overload for employees. I mean, these were literally printed newsletters, right? Stapled in the corners that showed up in your inbox, and there'd be a big stack of them. And you'd go, oh my God, do I really need to read all of this stuff? What was employee communications doing if not aggregating this and telling me what I needed to know in a more consolidated format? So this, I think, is the same thing. I think employees have this new tool. There's not a lot of training happening in most organizations. There's not a lot of guidance. There is a lot of instruction to start using this in your work and figure out how to take advantage of it. I mean, that's not a bad thing. Experimentation, I think, is important because everybody's going to be using it differently based on their role and their tasks. It's not like, as I've said before, something like Workday, where everybody uses the tool exactly the same way, regardless of what their job is. But without some framework for all of this, people are going to take their best stab at it. And without knowing how to write a good prompt, without knowing how to evaluate what the output is, I think a lot of people are going to create Workslop. They're going to throw it out there into the mix, and everybody else is going to have to deal with it. And we're going to see a lot of this for a while until organizations start to get their arms around how to think about this from a more organic and more holistic perspective about how AI is changing the way work gets done and helping employees understand what expectations are and training them on how to assess the outputs that they got. We did a whole episode on the fact that there are some people out there who think verification is going to become a job. It's one of the new roles that's going to emerge from the creative destruction that is being foisted on us by all those jobs that are going away. Well, here's one that's going to be created. Somebody's going to need to look at what's being produced and verify its accuracy and its credibility. We'll see whether that shakes out to be true, but that's where Workslop is coming from. I think. I don't think it's a long-term problem. I think it will resolve itself the same way, 86 departmental newsletters resolved itself.
So it's a real productivity killer, not just a catchy buzzword, do you think?
I think it is affecting productivity. Is it killing productivity? I got to believe that even that Workslop has some value in it. If the employee looked at it and said, yeah, this summarized the meeting well, or captured the issues and the challenges well. If it saved some time, have to look at the risk benefit analysis of this. Yeah, it's affecting somebody's productivity negatively, but it probably also affected somebody's productivity positively. And how does that wash out? Right. So Is it killing productivity entirely? I doubt that. I'd like to see better data than what was in that Harvard Business Review article before I'm going to say it's killing productivity. I think it's affecting it. And I think it's not a long-term issue.
Yeah, I think it's affecting it too. So going back to the every department issuing a newsletter and you're getting 15 of them in your inbox on a Monday morning. How do we address the reality of this? Because one thing we hear about predecessors of Workslop is the general term for AI slop. People are creating stuff constantly. It's like an eruption of content everywhere that by any term you might regard it as rubbish, basically.
Oh, yeah, tons of it.
More kindly, you might think this is great, but I haven't got time to read all this stuff. So how do we address that? Because that contributes surely even more so to a negative effect on productivity.
And that's an excellent question. I think that's why organizations need to get more strategic about their approach to AI. I think there are still too many that are seeing it as the underpinning of some tools that we will implement in the organization. We will deploy this software and we will use this tool rather than say this is actually going to reshape organization. I mean, our own CEO is very cognizant of that. He says there's going to be a day where the flip has switched, and if you're not ready, then suddenly you're irrelevant, and you got to start preparing for that. I think the organizations that are allowing this kind of work slop to be produced in prodigious amounts have not come to that conclusion yet, or at least they haven't taken any steps to address it.
Greetings, Shel and Neville and FIR listeners all around the world. It's Dan York coming at you from Shelburne, Vermont, and 3 topics today. First, the end of services. Back on August 27th, I received word, along with many others, about TypePad was shutting down after 20 years of providing a hosting platform for blogs. Now, the long-time listeners will remember that back in the day, in the mid-2000s, TypePad was one of the contenders for where you hosted your blog. And for a period of time, there were many big sites and others on there. Essentially, it's a hosted version of the movable type software, in the same way that WordPress.com is a hosted version of WordPress software. This was the same thing. And some of us, like myself, based our blogging around that. And then in the intervening 20 years, the service has faded from use. More and more people have moved away, and just really some of us still clinging on were there. And we got word that in 30 days, everything was going away. As of September 30th, probably the time when some of you are listening to the show, the service will have been shut down, content will be gone, all of those years of history are gone. So, of course, we've been somewhat, panicking to try to figure out how to move our sites and others. And thankfully, there was a service, SaveMyBlog.com, that let me go and help migrate my site for a fee to get me the things I need to do. And I'm setting it up all on a hosted WordPress environment now and doing all that kind of stuff. I've wanted to make this move for a couple of years, but this kind of forced it on some level. But this is the question for all of you listeners. What is your plan B if your hosting provider goes away? Now, the good news is if you base your software on something like WordPress right now, WordPress makes it super easy to migrate from one host to another. You can simply download a big XML file, upload it onto the other system. It can copy over the images, and the migration is pretty simple and easy. If you're not using WordPress, what's your plan? Now, maybe you operate your own websites and have your own team. That's fine. But if you are using a hosted provider, what is your plan? That's something you need to be thinking about if you're not already, is what happens if your hosting provider gives you, say, 30 days or less to say that it's going away. What will you move? How will you do it? Speaking of that, some of you who are using Vimeo might want to be paying attention. If you used Vimeo or previously Livestream.com, which was then acquired by Vimeo, word came this month that Vimeo has been acquired by a company called Bending Spoons out of Europe. They're a big mobile app developer. So I will just say you need to be a little concerned here. This is the company that acquired Evernote and then basically laid off all the staff, changed its functioning, and made it a shell of what it was. They also acquired a company called WeTransfer and did the same kind of things later as well. So if you're using Vimeo for your videos, you might want to pay attention and think about, do you have a plan B if they change the services and change the pieces that are part of that? Whew. On a different topic completely, and kind of tying in with a lot of the other AI related stuff in this episode, I was noticing that Firefox for iOS now has this, it's kind of cool. It's a summarize feature. You can just, on a newer phone, you just shake the phone when you're using Firefox, and you'll get a locally AI generated summary of the page. Or you can, I'm not on a newer phone that can do this, on an older phone, you can tap the Thunderbolt icon that shows up in the address bar, and you'll get a little summary. There's also a menu item to do this. The reason I point this out is because it's interesting to look at what does your page summarize as. Now, a couple caveats. First of all, to use this feature right now, you will have to be using Firefox. I think there's a small percentage of people who are actually using Firefox on iOS devices. I don't know the stats, but I have to think that probably most people just use a default browser. So some small percentage of people are using Firefox. And then those people also have to have newer phones that will work with Apple Intelligence to really work with it, or they have to tap the little icon type of thing. But the key point, though, is this kind of feature will be coming to other browsers and other systems. It's kind of the natural evolution of where we see all this going, especially with, in the iOS case, Apple Intelligence and the ability to use local LLMs. And we're seeing this across a range of iOS apps to go and provide abilities to summarize or come up with other information and stuff. But the key point is, what does your website summarize as? When somebody goes to your web page, and you could try this with various different LLMs and just, say, provide a summary of my website or whatever, and see, because as people use ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity, whatever, as their main search tools, increasingly you don't have to care as much about search engine placement as you do within AI. In fact, I'm told, I could see there that people are now calling this AEO for AI engine optimization, or AIO for AI optimization, whatever. There's a whole thing around that, which of course mostly is do really good SEO and then write content in good ways, have detailed articles, those kind of things. But there's of course a whole range around this. But that's the question. What does your page summarize to? Is that what you want it to summarize to? And if not, how do you go and change that? Finally, I'll just end on a more positive end. Mastodon, the Fediverse service, the main one in there, finally rolled out quote posts. And this is something that's there. You might say most services have this, but they did it in a very cool way. Because one of the reasons they did not do it back years ago when they started out was that there was a lot of concern about people misusing quote posts to abuse other people. Since then, of course, people have pointed out that quote posts get used in very positive ways to amplify and do this. But now what they've done is they've done some very powerful things that put you in control of where your content is quoted. So you have some settings that, for instance, you could just say you don't want any of your quotes, your posts to be quoted. You can change that so people just can't do it, or you could do it on a per post basis. But more interestingly, you get notified when somebody quotes your post, and you can choose to remove that if you wish. So you could say, no, that particular usage is not okay with me. I'm going to not allow that quote to be posted, or post to be quoted, I guess I'd say. So it's interesting how they're doing it in a really very smart way that goes and allows users to be in control of where their content shows up there. So let's land on that positive post. If you're a Mastodon user, there's some cool things you could do now. With that, I'm going to send it back to you guys. You can find more of my audio and writing at danyork.me. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.
Thanks very much, Dan. Terrific report. Particularly caught my attention was Typepad. I mean, I was on Typepad at the start from 2004. After I started blogging on Blogspot in 2002, I moved to Typepad because that's where most communicators I knew at the time were, on Typepad. I stayed with Typepad as an active site until early 2006, when I then moved to WordPress. And I was on WordPress until last year, actually, all that time. But I kept Typepad going as an archive on the original site that I had. And so I was continue paying the subscription all those years from 2006 until 2021, when I stopped it completely. And moved all my content out into an archive site on WordPress. So I did that in 2021. So interested to hear how you were kind of framing it. It's ending literally in a couple of days. And if you haven't thought about this, you've got a bit of work to do now if you want to keep your site. It's actually quite easy to migrate it out, except it doesn't include the images and all that content. You've got to do that separately. And then you've got to find a way to merge it into your new site. That's not a small task. But it's a good call you made, Dan, to remind people. I know 3 people currently who are still on TypePad. And to my knowledge, I have no awareness whatsoever that the door's about to shut on them. And they got nowhere else to go. That's a problem. So it's good that you highlighted it, and I hope people do take note of the fact that this is ending soon.
I was never a TypePad user, but what I do remember about TypePad is that it was the platform for the early, seriously influential bloggers out there. Heather Armstrong, Deuce, was a TypePad blog. I mean, that was widely considered a pioneer in personal blogging. Post Secret was another TypePad. Do you remember Post Secret, where it was Frank Warren behind it, invited users to mail in anonymous secrets on postcards that he scanned and posted there? I have 2 Post Secrets books.
Didn't catch that one. Yeah.
Oh, I have 2 books of these that got published. A lot of them went viral before they even started calling this stuff viral. Freakonomics, Stephen Dubner and Stephen Levitt. It's now a very successful podcast, but the earliest version of that was a blog on TypePad. It's what people used in the early days not the only one.
Do you remember in early 2005, we'd only been doing this podcast for a couple of months. We interviewed Louis Clemeur in France, who had just joined the company Six Apart, which owned TypePad. He'd come from a French blogging platform that he'd launched, and they kind of got together and merged. But we interviewed Louis, if I'm not wrong, it must have been February or March, and we did another one with him a bit later when he set out the whole vision for what TypePad would go on to be. So we kind of got an early picture of what was coming. That was quite exciting, I think. I remember that, Shel.
We've been doing this long enough to cover birth, life, and death.
We have. So yeah, quite some changes. That's really good. And of course, Dan then talks about one of the newer platforms, Mastodon, which is introducing commenting. That's probably a big deal. I'm not totally sure because I'm not hugely active on Mastodon. What do you think of that one?
Well, I still have a Mastodon instance, so I'm looking forward to digging into this a little bit more. I was more interested in the Vimeo report because I hadn't heard about Vimeo.
Yep.
Vimeo's been around a long time. They have struggled to define a space for themselves in a world dominated by YouTube. I mean, high quality private videos that you can make available for business uses. I still get pitched by Vimeo sales reps all the time. I get phone calls and emails, and please join us for a demo to see some of our latest features. And my answer is, yeah, we're on YouTube. Thanks. But it's been around for a while, but I think they've struggled from the get-go to define a niche for themselves. But one of the constant headaches in internal communication is making sure that the right message gets to the right people. If you've ever sent a company-wide update because you weren't sure who really needed that information, or spent hours hunting down the right mailing list, the right Outlook directory for just the right niche audience, you know what I'm talking about. And I do this all the time. That's why a new research paper from Amazon's reliability and maintenance engineering team caught my eye. And when I say research paper, I'm not kidding. This is an academic research paper. The title is a mouthful. An explainable natural language framework for identifying and notifying target audiences in enterprise communication. Memorize that, would you please? What it boils down to is this. They've built a system that lets you ask in plain language who should get your message, and the AI not only finds the audience, it explains how it got there. So let's look at an example. Imagine you need to alert all the technicians working on a certain vendor's conveyor belts across European facilities. Today, that might mean sifting through spreadsheets, querying a database, if you know how, or more often than not, blasting the update to way more people than necessary just to make sure that the people who need it get it. With this framework developed by this Amazon team, though, you'd simply type, I want to reach out to all maintenance technicians working with vendor X's conveyor belts at European sites. The system would parse that request, turn it into a structured query against a knowledge graph of equipment, people, and locations, and spit back the precise audience. Here's the important part. It doesn't just give you a list. It shows you its reasoning. It says, here's how I matched vendor X to this equipment category. Here's how I identified European facilities. Here's how I linked job titles to maintenance technicians. That explainability feature is just absolutely critical, because without it, you're going to wonder whether the AI really understood your request. In a high stakes setting like maintenance or safety communication, you can't afford to trust a black box. For internal communicators, the implications are huge. Think about all the times we struggle with over-communication or under-communication. Too often we send broad messages to everyone because we don't trust our lists, and the result is message fatigue. Other times we miss people who actually needed the information. A system like the one being proposed here could make targeting as easy as writing a natural language query, but with enough transparency built in that you can actually trust the results. And this ties directly to something we've been hearing on the marketing side. HubSpot recently noted that customers are tired of superficial personalization, like, hey, first name, and expecting something closer to Netflix level personalization, where content reflects their actual context, their interests, and their needs. Employees aren't any different from those customers. They don't want to be spammed with irrelevant messages just because they happen to be on a list. They want communication that's targeted to their role, their location, their work environment. And that is exactly the kind of problem that Amazon's framework is trying to solve. Instead of treating employees as one size fits all, it gives communicators the ability to segment with precision and crucially explain why someone is included in a message. That's personalization with transparency and could go a long way toward rebuilding employee trust in internal comms. Now, there are challenges. Employees may have concerns about privacy, about being mapped into a graph database that tracks who they are, what they're working on, and where. Communicators would also need to learn to validate the system's reasoning, not just accept whichever audience it suggests. Again, that verification comes into play. And in practice, this approach would only work as well as the underlying data. If job titles are inconsistent or if equipment records aren't up to date, the outputs will reflect that. But step back for a moment and look at the bigger picture. What Amazon's RME team has piloted here is a blueprint for how large organizations can rethink audience targeting in internal communications. It's not hard to imagine this framework being extended to human resource messages, to IT change management, even culture and engagement campaigns. Imagine typing, find all new employees in North America who joined in the last 6 months and haven't completed their compliance training. Or all people managers in finance who haven't logged into the new expense system yet. That's audience targeting with precision and explainability, and is light years beyond what most communicators can do today. So while this is still just research and there is not a product yet that you can buy, I think communicators should watch this space very closely, because it points to a future where internal communication is every bit as personalized, relevant, and transparent as the best external marketing campaigns. And that could challenge how we think about everything from crisis alerts to engagement initiatives.
Yeah, I think the way you've described that is very good, Shel, to understand this, because I really had difficulty finding a simple explanation of the Amazon RME framework anywhere online. And in fact, there isn't one. Amazon's site doesn't display one in search results, a lot of job vacancies in the team. What I did find, though, and I just love this, is an AI overview that explained it very simply what it is. And there, to me, is a perfect example of why traditional search is heading to the graveyard, in my opinion. This is a good example to illustrate that. So I was keen to understand, because I knew you were talking about this, is this something, a live product? No, it's not. You just answered that question. It's an internal structure within Amazon, but it's what the components let you do is the point you're making, right? That's where it could go into organizations. Because I guess my question, I think, is I don't see how this. So it's what this enables people in Amazon to do is what you're saying should translate into any organization.
I don't know that anybody in Amazon's actually doing this yet. This is a team that developed a framework for consideration. I don't know that this is being applied. This is the earliest thinking about this stuff. And now, clearly, they
Okay.
would be coming up with this for implementation at Amazon. Amazon pays them. They're not going to want them throwing ideas out there that other companies would implement. But other companies could absolutely take advantage of this framework, especially if Amazon develops product that markets or licenses the framework to other organizations that can market it through different parts of enterprises. But it's very exciting because if you've ever worked in internal communication, you know how targeting is really, really difficult because the information that you need doesn't reside in any resources that we have access to or know how to use, or even the people behind them, whether it's, compliance or IT or whoever. Show me the people who, and, sometimes you get blank looks, and we don't have the ability to do that. This gives you the ability to do that and to verify the validity of the results that you're getting is just baked into the framework. I can't wait. I'm hoping that I am still actively employed when I can put this to the test.
Okay. Calendar marker in effect. Let's see.
I've got to set up a tracker on this so that I can see when something comes out.
Yeah, you definitely know he's a prime candidate for that. I'll share with you, by the way, the AI overview that I found. Now, this is a limitation of AI overview. To my knowledge, you can't actually save these results at all. You can't. So I'll do a screenshot and send it to you.
Yeah, that's what I do is copy and paste it into something.
Oh, do that. Yeah. In recent episodes, we've explored how the press release keeps reinventing itself in the digital age. Far from being dead, it's shifted from media distribution to SEO, and now, according to Sarah Evans, into a new role entirely as a generative AI visibility engine. In a fascinating long-read newsletter post, Evans, who is partner and head of PR at Zen Media based in Las Vegas, describes testing a press release announcing Zen Media's acquisition of e-commerce agency Optimum 7, distributed through Globe Newswire, and then tracking how it was picked up, not just by news outlets, but by AI systems like ChatGPT, Perplexity, and Meta AI. Within 6 hours of release, ChatGPT cited it 40 times. Meta's external agent cited it 17 times. Perplexity Bot and Apple Bot both cited it twice. Evans said there were 61 documented AI mentions in total in that time period. The implications are significant, I think. Press releases aren't just reaching journalists or showing up in Google search results anymore. They're feeding the knowledge base of the very AI systems people now use to ask questions and make decisions. In this world, the key metric isn't did it get coverage, but is it retrievable when AI is asked a critical question in our space? Now, this is the specific topic. We've talked about this a couple of times in recent episodes, ranging from, I guess the first big mention earlier the year was, is PR dead again? We talked about that. We've talked about the reinvention of the press release for algorithms, not just people. And now we've got this. This changes how PR teams need to think about structure, backlinks, FAQs, and even headlines, perhaps. Evans calls it a rebirth of the press release, not as an end in itself, but as a tool for persistent retrievability and authority in the age of AI. So the big question then is, if AI engines are the new gatekeepers of visibility, how should communicators rethink the way they write and measure press releases, if they need to do that even? What do you think, Shel?
Well, first of all, I'm glad you're citing Sarah Evans. I follow her on LinkedIn. I think she's terrific. We ought to invite her to be a guest on the interview show. But in a different post that she published recently, it was 10 PR myths I'm seeing. PR myth is press releases don't matter. But what she says is they matter more than ever. We're seeing early results with releases averaging about 285 citations in ChatGPT within 30 days. That tells me what I believed in the first place, is that press releases can be viewed by LLMs as credible sources of information, particularly based on where they get picked up. So, yeah, I think she's absolutely right about this. By the way, the other 10 myths she talks about are all directly related to this issue of generative engine optimization or search everywhere optimization. One of the myths is that AI ignores Reddit and Wikipedia. She says both are active citation sources. A myth is that AI visibility equals keywords, and she says prompts matter more than keywords. I'll put a link to this LinkedIn post in the show notes. It's pretty good. One of the things that she does talk about, though, is how structured information is important. Ginny Dietrich has a new podcast on this topic too. She actually talks about the idea of having a page on your website for information that is not linked anywhere, that people won't go look at it. It is there just for the AI search bots. And it's all the structured version. It's all the markdown version of the content that you have on other pages, so that the AI is more likely to understand the nature of the information and the context of the information and to be able to apply it appropriately in responses to prompts. So yeah, I think press releases aren't going anywhere. I think every time somebody proclaims them dead, we have yet to see them seen. They haven't even changed all that much, frankly. I still get press releases telling me that they're embargoed, where I have never heard of the person who's sending me the press release or the company in question. And in case anybody's wondering and haven't heard me rant about this before, no, it is not embargoed unless you and I have agreed to that before you send it to me. So, but yeah, I agree with her 100%. I think press releases are a source of credible information that AI training sets are going to use. And will come up in the results of searches.
Yeah, I had a rant about embargoes in a blog post I wrote in my own blog about a month or so back, so I know where you're coming from on that. So it's interesting, this topic, though. And I got one question that has been going around in my mind about what does retrievability mean for communicators, is what I'm asking. If AI engines, not journalists or search engines, are now the arbiters of visibility, how do PR teams measure success differently? I think we might have asked Stephanie Grober that in the interview. Are citations in AI answers more valuable than traditional pickups? What do you think?
I think they're both valuable. There has been a tremendous decline in searches, but it hasn't fallen to zero. It hasn't even fallen to, I think, 50%. So people are still out there searching. There are people who have not come to terms with AI, may not even be familiar with its search capabilities yet. There are still searches that I conduct on Google just because the nature of the search is one where I need those 10 links, not an overview. I mean, I did this when we were in Rome looking for a place to eat that opened earlier than 7 p.m. I actually tried using AI for that as long as I was looking, but it was Google. I was looking for, pasta restaurants near this hotel location that are currently open, and Google search results gave me what I needed.
Not an AI overview. Not an AI overview.
Not an AI overview. And in fact, one of those myths that Sarah Evans lists is choose traditional or modern PR. And she says the strongest strategies use a dual pathway. I think it's like Mitch Joel always said, it's along with, not instead of.
I think that is a very sensible answer. So this is worth reading, the Substack article, along with the link you're going to put in the show notes, that hopefully will make you think, dear listeners. This is a topic worth looking into more.
It absolutely is. And yeah, I'm going to probably be doing a press release here in the next week or two. Can't say more than that, but it's coming. One of the more interesting debates about AI at work is shifting from what these systems can do to how people actually use them. I'm going to reference Professor Maulik again. He sparked a lot of conversation with the argument that in practice, people lean on AI for higher level cognitive tasks, framing, sense-making, brainstorming, rather than just automating grunt work. That's provocative, and recent usage studies from OpenAI and Anthropic give us fresh data to compare against that claim. So let's start with the top line. Two big AI vendors both published How People Really Use It reports. Business Insider's roundup is a helpful starting point. OpenAI's analysis of ChatGPT usage shows a lot of augmentation, writing, editing, summarizing, brainstorming, decision support. They bucket behavior into doing, asking, and expressing, with asking, that's decision support, recently becoming the largest slice, very much in line with the thinking partner idea. Anthropic, meanwhile, paints a completely different picture for Claude in enterprise context. Bloomberg's coverage and several follow-ups highlight that businesses are using Claude chiefly to automate workflows, coding, math-heavy tasks, and embedding the model in document processing and reporting pipelines. Automation now exceeds augmentation in Claude's usage mix. Some outlets even quantified it. Roughly 3/4 of business use cases show automation patterns, including full task delegation. It's a pretty stark counterpoint to the AI as a primarily collaborative narrative. Zooming out, Forbes' overview, drawing on OpenAI, Anthropic, and Ipsos, underscores a couple of useful nuances. Adoption is broadening fast, trust remains uneven, and behaviors vary by context. Consumer, student, prosumer usage can look very different from enterprise deployment. That helps explain why OpenAI's and Anthropic's snapshots diverge. ZDNet's take, which has been widely shared, frames it succinctly. ChatGPT is mostly used for writing and decision support, often non-work or para-work tasks, while Claude skews towards structured enterprise automation, especially coding and back office flows. If you're seeing both trends in your company at once, you're not imagining it. You're genuinely seeing these two platforms coexist. So where does that leave Moloch's claim? I think the fairest read is this. Both realities are true, depending on who the user is and where the AI is being used. Among general knowledge workers and individual contributors, AI is frequently a thinking companion, an accelerator for analysis, drafting, options testing, and finding the right words. Among engineering and operations team and in applications wired into APIs and back-end systems, AI increasingly acts as an automation substrate, quietly taking whole tasks off people's plates. And these are important implications and risks in that split. First, for communicators, AI is already in the room at the idea stage. If OpenAI's usage patterns hold, many colleagues will bring AI into brainstorming, framing memos, outlining strategies, and refining tone. That doesn't eliminate our jobs, it does change them. We become editors, synthesizers, and standard setters, deciding which AI-assisted ideas are sound and which need to go back to the shop. Second, automation is marching into comms-adjacent workflows. Anthropic's data shows that teams are wiring models into repeatable processes, templated reports, spreadsheet transformations, QA checks, coding small tools, and document processing. Some of that touches communication supply chains, research packets, analytics summaries, media monitoring, and content formatting, for example, where end-to-end delegation is now possible. That's where quality, governance, and accountability matter most. It's easy to ship confidently wrong content faster than ever. Third, the disputes themselves are a signal. If one of the data says collaboration and another says automation, the practical answer is not to pick a side, it's to design for both. In other words, assume your organization will have cognitive and creative use, drafting, ideation, narrative testing, where human judgment is central, and workflow automation, data pools, summaries, templated outputs, where guardrails and sign-offs are central. Here's how I'd translate that into action for communicators in 4 quick points. 1, declare the boundary between assist and automate. Decide which steps in your communications processes may be automated, like first-pass summaries, formatting, variations on headlines, and which must remain human-led, like message architecture, risk framing, attribution, and approvals. Then write it down. This reduces ambiguity and helps avoid secret automation that erodes trust. Anthropic's usage trend is the cautionary tale here. 2, instrument the pipeline. If you automate any step, add checks, provenance tags, for example, AI assisted, reviewer fields, and automated fact checks and policy scans. Treat automation like a production line with quality gates, not some sort of mystical, magical box. OpenAI's asking heavy usage reminds us that people want guidance. Give them structured places to ask and to verify. 3, build a thinking partner bench. Provide prompt templates for ideation, scenario planning, tone exploration, and stakeholder mapping. If AI is already a collaborator, give your teams good ways to collaborate with it so their first drafts are stronger and your edit passes are lighter. ZDNet synthesis is a good bellwether on how users split their time today. And 4th, mind the labor story. Several reports warn that enterprise tilt toward automation could accelerate job disruption. As leaders in communication, we should help our organizations narrate this change transparently. What's automating, what's upskilling, and where human judgment remains the point. Silence breeds speculation. So just to sum it up, Ethan Mollick's thesis is directionally right for many knowledge workers. AI is a thinking partner, but the enterprise data shows a parallel track where AI is already a quiet automator. The communicator's job is to make both tracks useful and safe, champion AI where it improves thinking, constrain it where it automates, and keep the organizational trust account in the black.
Good advice, I would say. I find it interesting, particularly the ZDNet report, talking about the split between personal use and non-personal use. And I think I'm probably the most difficult to define in that regard because it's spread all over the place from my point of view. I research things that arguably you could say, well, that's kind of work related. Well, it's something I'm interested in, even though it may not be something I'm going to do anything about. I use tools like ChatGPT, particularly. I do not use Claude. I haven't for a year or so. No particular reason. I just settled down on ChatGPT mostly. But I found it very interesting to look at who is using it or these tools and where they are. It talks about the US is the biggest user share of Claude. Israel is big as well. And in fact, it talks about people in Israel use Claude about 7 times more than you'd expect based on the size of the country's working age population. Interesting, that one. California is the leading state in terms of usage in the US for Claude.
No surprise there.
Making up 25%, a quarter of all usage, mostly for IT tasks. And that's something I found very interesting when this report talks about Claude as being a preferred tool for coding, whereas ChatGPT is for tasks and how-to articles and training. I used ChatGPT for coding in a recent project when I redid my website on Ghost and personalized and customized a theme that required editing the theme templates. And that exposed me to Handlebars, the template language used by Ghost. But ChatGPT, to my utter astonishment, was absolutely astounding in what it had achieved, particularly after when ChatGPT 5 came out. I read quite a few comments, people saying it's utterly useless at coding, didn't do the job people were wanting it. Well, for me, it did it perfectly. Not only its knowledge of that particular platform and how everything works, but also how can you say, brainstorm a quirk in Ghost, where to do something you had to do workarounds with cascading style sheets or JavaScript in particular. It knew exactly how to do that. And I also had success with asking Claude about code that I had followed instructions from the theme developer, for instance, to do something that wasn't quite working, and it pinpointed exactly why. So from that point, as we got into the development, I was actually asking ChatGPT more about how to write the code than me just going ahead writing it and having it review it. So that to me is a vindication. I guess you could argue that if someone was said to me, well, you don't know all this code, how do you verify what it was doing was accurate? Well, to me, the answer was that when I uploaded it and hit go live on the website, everything worked. Nothing fell over at all. There were no errors whatsoever. So for me as a non-coding person, and certainly not a programmer, but someone who tinkers, if you like, but, my skills communication, not coding, this project gave me huge confidence in being able to do this thanks to the AI more than anything else. The tools I used were brilliant. Docker and VS Code from Microsoft, a fantastic local installation on a Windows 11 PC, all worked. More than my expectations were met, without any doubt. So I was impressed with that. And I'm thinking that's a use. I wonder where that fits into this kind of analysis. And what about all the other generative AI tools people might use? I mean, this focuses on Claude and ChatGPT primarily.
Well, it's because they're the ones that issued the reports. Yeah.
Well, that's true. You're absolutely right, Shel. Yeah, you're absolutely right,
Yeah.
Of course. They're not going to mention the other guys.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah, and I think there's no question that ChatGPT does a very good job with coding. All of these frontier LLMs do that. Claude is out in front in terms of the benchmarks. It's a top performer. It surpasses and Gemini on standard tests. I'm not a coder, so I don't know what all these are, but SWE Bench and Human Eval are too. I think it just got like a perfect score on one of the coding tests. So they're heavily marketing Claude to the programming and the coding community. And I think that's one of the reasons it's being adopted so heavily there. They've also got the APIs that connect with some of these other coding tools and in relationships with these organizations. So it makes sense. If they're pushing it, I think they're probably gratified to see that that's where the use is. ChatGPT, OpenAI is pushing this more as a consumer type of a thing in addition to being an enterprise tool. And that's why you're seeing people look for, what should I wear tonight? And you have a recipe.
Are we seeing that? Okay.
Yeah, I was reading that Gen Z is using this to make basic day-to-day life decisions, which I find fascinating.
That I've read. I've read that a lot. Yeah, I've read about that a lot. But I mean, it says, as the report says again, if it's their data, okay, fair enough. ChatGPT usage is booming worldwide with 700 million weekly users as of July. I mean, that's extraordinary. Interesting element to this, that growth has been relatively faster in low and middle income countries, the report notes. About 80% of early ChatGPT users were men. That share has since dropped to 48% as of June, with more active users now having typically feminine first names. That's how they're defining it. A boy named Sue, or the other way around, perhaps. So these are useful metrics to consider. I'm just wondering, though, what it means to, your average communicator, or indeed the average person out there using it when he reads, well, I use ChatGPT, but this report's telling me that it's only for coding. Are people going to take that away, do you think?
No, I hope not. I don't think that's the point. I think from the communication standpoint, it's understanding that it's not an either or, that there are two ways that this stuff is being used, and one is not right and the other is not wrong, but we really need to start to provide the resources, the tools, the policies, the guardrails, the governance, so that people can use it either way to their best advantage and to the organization's best advantage, rather than struggle with it.
So this is just like any other technology tool. For instance, our company uses, Microsoft Office, all the whole suite, and that's what we support.
Right.
And don't encourage you to use anything else, but if you do, you're on your own. I mean, is it like we use Claude and ChatGPT? If you're using Perplexity, tough, you're on your own. We'll support you on these.
Right.
I mean, I'm exaggerating, of course, but I mean, you can't have a Wild West with any kind of tool. You got to have a standard that you can support, right?
I find some organizations are maybe swinging too far the other direction with that. I was talking to one company who shall remain nameless, that I was talking to them about how they could take advantage of Notebook LM. And they say, no, we have to use our internal version of AI and we're not allowed to use anything else. I said, well, does your internal version of AI do what Notebook LM does? And they go, oh, no, nothing even remotely like that. Well, then you're hamstrung, aren't you? So, yeah, I think organizations need to look at that.
Market conditions will have an impact on that,
without any question.
At some point.
Yeah. And that will wrap up this episode of For Immediate Release, episode 482, our long form episode for September 2025. Right now, we are planning on recording our long form episode for October on Saturday the 25th or Sunday the 26th. Remains to be seen, Neville, based on your schedule. Either one works for me, but that episode will drop on Monday, October 27th. And of course, we will have short midweek episodes in between, maybe even an interview. We're trying to line one or two of those up right now. Until then, that will be a 30 for this episode for Immediate Release.